anti-Semitism dies hard. In fact, it doesn't die at all. It just keeps coming back with its libelous lies, refurbished, regurgitated over and over again. And I want to tell you something else. These anti-Semitic lies, they have consequences. In recent months, Jews have been assaulted in Canada, Australia, Britain, France, the Netherlands, and elsewhere. Here in America, an elderly Holocaust survivor was burned to death in Colorado. And a beautiful young couple from the Israeli embassy in Washington was brutally gunned down right in front of the Holocaust Museum there. Thankfully, President Trump's administration is forcefully fighting the scourge of anti-Semitism, and every government here should follow its lead. But instead, many do the opposite. They actually reward the worst anti-Semites on earth. This week, the leaders of France, Britain, Australia, Canada, and other countries unconditionally recognized a Palestinian state. They did so after the horrors committed by Hamas on October 7th. Horrors praised on that day by nearly 90% of the Palestinian population. So let me say that again. Nearly 90% of Palestinians supported the attack on October 7th. It's not supported only, they celebrated it. They danced on the rooftops. They threw candies. That's both in Gaza and in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, as you call it. And it's just the way they celebrated another horror, 9/11. They danced on the rooftops. They cheered. They threw candy. You know what message the leaders who recognize the Palestinian state this week sent to the Palestinians? It's a very clear message. Murdering Jews pays off. Well, I have a message for these leaders. When the most savage terrorists on earth are effusively praising your decision, you didn't do something right. You did something wrong, horribly wrong. Your disgraceful decision will encourage terrorism against Jews and against innocent people everywhere. It will be a mark of shame on all of you. But wait a minute, Mr. Prime Minister, they tell me. Wait a minute. We believe in a two-state solution where the Jewish state of Israel will live side by side in peace with the Palestinian state. There's only one problem with that. The Palestinians, they don't believe in this solution. They never have. They don't want a state next to Israel. They want a Palestinian state instead of Israel. And that's why every time they were offered a Palestinian state, but were required to end the conflict with Israel and recognize the Jewish state, every time, over the decades, they turned it down. And that is why every time they were given territory, they used it to attack us. In fact, they effectively had a Palestinian state in Gaza. So what did they do with that state? Peace? Coexistence? No. They attacked us time and time again. Totally unprovoked. They fired rockets into our cities. They murdered our children. They turned Gaza into a terror base from which they committed the October 7th massacre. So here's the uncomfortable truth. The persistent Palestinian rejection of a Jewish state in any boundary is what has driven this conflict for over a century. It is still driving it. It's not the absence of a Palestinian state. It's the presence and existence of a Jewish state. And I find it amazing, that the foreign chancelleries and the ministries and all those who pontificate about this, and the leaders, How can they not see this basic truth when it is repeated again and again and again ad nauseum? And I want to say something else. This rejection of a Jewish state not only applies to Hamas, it also applies to the so-called moderate Palestinian Authority. You should know that the Palestinian Authority pays terrorists to slay Jews. The more Jews the terrorists slay, the more the Palestinian Authority pays. The Palestinian Authority names its government buildings, its public squares, its schools, after the mass murderers of Jews, which they glorify as martyrs. They pay and glorify not just the killer of Jews, but also killers of Christians. Christians like Taylor Force, an American veteran who was brutally murdered in Israel by Palestinian terrorists. But, that I hear from the Western leaders. They tell me, the PA promised us it will reform. And I know this time, Prime Minister, it will be different. Yeah, right. We've heard these promises for decades. They always promise. They never deliver. Because you see, the Palestinian Authority is corrupt to the core. They haven't held elections in 20 years. They use the same textbooks as Hamas, exactly the same textbooks. They teach their children to hate Jews and destroy the Jewish state. And Christians don't fare much better. When Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus, was under Israeli control, 80% of its residents were Christians. But since the PA took control, that number has dwindled to under 20%. These are the people you want to give a state to? What you're doing is giving the ultimate reward to intolerant fanatics who perpetrated and supported the October 7th massacre. Giving the Palestinians a state 1 mile from Jerusalem after October 7th is like giving Al-Qaeda a state 1 mile from New York City after September 11th. This is sheer madness. It's insane, and we won't do it.